There was nothing unusual about the coffee mug. It sat quietly on the kitchen island, a thin ribbon of steam curling into the morning air, as though someone had poured it only moments ago. Beside it rested a pair of reading glasses, folded with deliberate care. A small vase held fresh white lilies, their fragrance drifting through the room. The flowers couldn't have been more than a day old. The only problem? The owner of the house had looked me straight in the eyes less than 10 minutes earlier and said, "I live alone." So, who had made the coffee? Who had arranged the flowers? And why did the entire house feel as though someone had just stepped into another room the moment I walked through the front door? Sometimes, walls remember things that people try their hardest to forget. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any confession. And sometimes, the biggest lie isn't spoken by the person standing in front of you. It's hidden inside the place they call home. Welcome back to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story is more than a romance. It's a journey through love, healing, forgiveness, and the life lessons that shape who we become. If you're new here, you're in the perfect place. Take a moment to subscribe, turn on notifications, and become part of our growing family. And if you've ever walked into a place that instantly reminded you of someone you couldn't forget, tell us about it in the comments below. Your story might remind someone else that they aren't alone. Now settle in, because today's story isn't about catching a cheating husband. It isn't about exposing a secret affair. And it isn't about a billionaire hiding another woman behind a locked door. At least, that's what everyone, including me, believed at first. When I accepted the job of renovating Benjamin Ben Sullivan's lakeside home, I expected old hardwood floors, outdated lighting, and a long list of expensive repairs. Ben was one of Seattle's most respected CEOs, a man whose name regularly appeared in business magazines beside headlines praising his vision, discipline, and success. People described him as brilliant, composed, and almost impossible to read. They also described him as a man who preferred being alone. He never corrected them. The house stood at the edge of a quiet lake, surrounded by towering cedar trees that swayed gently in the morning breeze. It was beautiful in the kind of way that couldn't be bought overnight. Every beam, every stone, every window seemed to carry years of careful attention. Yet beneath its beauty lingered something impossible to explain. It didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, not by footsteps echoing through the halls, not by whispered voices hiding behind closed doors, but by memories so vivid they seemed to breathe. Ben greeted me with a polite smile and a firm handshake before leading me through the front entrance. "I appreciate you coming out here, Naomi," he said. "The house needs updating." His voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice that revealed absolutely nothing about the man behind it. As we walked from room to room, he answered every question with the efficiency of someone used to making decisions worth millions of dollars. Then we reached the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Almost casually he said, "You'll have complete access to every room except the storage attic. And just so you know, there's no one else living here." No one else. Such a simple sentence. So ordinary. Yet something about the way he said it lingered in my mind long after he'd moved on. Minutes later, while he stepped outside to take a phone call, I wandered back into the kitchen to begin taking measurements. That's when I saw it. The coffee mug, still steaming, still warm, as though someone had taken a sip, and planned to return. I reached toward it without thinking. The ceramic was hot enough to make me pull my fingers back. I slowly looked around the silent kitchen. Every chair was neatly pushed in. Every window was locked. Every room was still. And yet every instinct I had whispered the same unsettling thought. Someone else was here. I didn't know it then, but that single cup of coffee was the first thread in a mystery that would unravel not only the secrets hidden inside Ben Sullivan's house, but also the walls surrounding his heart. And my own. Because before this story was over, I would discover that the greatest secrets aren't hidden behind locked doors. They're hidden behind people who have convinced themselves they're no longer allowed to feel. Ben's answer stayed with me long after we left the music room. Long enough ago that I don't remember. It sounded believable, but not truthful. There is a difference. In my experience, people who forget something important answer quickly. People who remember every detail often pause first, carefully deciding how much of the truth they're willing to reveal. Ben had paused. As we continued the tour, he slipped effortlessly back into business mode, pointing out rooms that needed updating and making practical notes about the renovation. The guest bathroom needs new plumbing. The deck should probably be expanded. I'd like the office to feel warmer without becoming cluttered. He spoke with confidence about every corner of the house. Yet whenever we passed the piano room, his eyes never wandered inside. Not once. He walked a little faster instead. It was such a small detail that most people would have missed it. I didn't. One thing my grandmother used to tell me when I was little was, "People may lie with their mouths, Naomi, but their feet almost always tell the truth. She grew up in Georgia and spent 40 years working as a school counselor. Thousands of children had passed through her office, each carrying stories they didn't know how to tell. Watch where people stop, she'd say. Watch what they avoid. I'd built an entire career doing exactly that. The tour eventually led us onto the back deck overlooking Lake Washington. The afternoon sunlight danced across the water, turning the surface into thousands of tiny mirrors. It was breathtaking. You have an incredible view, I said. Ben rested his hands on the wooden railing. I bought the property for the view. And stayed because... He smiled without looking at me. I've been asking myself that same question. His honesty caught me off guard. Most successful people spent their lives convincing everyone, including themselves, that every decision they'd ever made had been the right one. Ben wasn't pretending. For the first time since arriving, I realized something. He didn't seem lonely because he lived alone. He seemed lonely because he'd forgotten how not to be. There was a difference. Loneliness isn't measured by the number of people around you. It's measured by how safe you feel letting someone truly know you. That realization lingered in my thoughts as we walked back inside. Near the staircase, I stopped to jot down a few measurements in my notebook. Ben's phone buzzed again. He sighed apologetically. I'm sorry, the board doesn't seem to understand weekends. I'll survive without you for 5 minutes. You sure? I laughed. I renovate century-old houses. I think I can handle one modern staircase. For the first time that afternoon, his smile reached his eyes. I'll be right back. As the front door closed behind him, the house settled into silence once more. Real silence. Or so I thought. I wandered into the dining room, where afternoon sunlight spilled across a long oak table polished to a soft shine. There were 8 chairs, each one perfectly aligned. My fingertips traced the edge of the table. It had been cared for, loved, used, not recently, but often enough that I could almost picture the conversations it had once held. Birthday dinners, holiday meals, late-night homework, arguments followed by apologies. Homes absorb those moments. You can't see them, but somehow, you feel them. On the far wall hung a collection of framed photographs. I stepped closer. Most were landscapes, mountains, lakes, forests. Then, almost hidden among them, I found one family photograph. A younger Ben stood with a woman whose smile filled the frame. Between them stood a little girl with tightly curled brown hair, missing one front tooth as she grinned at the camera. They looked happy, not perfect. Happy, the kind of happiness that exists before anyone realizes it won't last forever. Without thinking, I smiled back at the photograph. You must have been a wonderful family, I whispered. Just then, I heard the floor creak behind me. I turned. No one. Only the empty hallway stretching toward the kitchen. A breeze? Maybe. Old houses creak all the time. Still, the sound had felt deliberate, like footsteps stopping the moment I looked up. I let out a quiet breath and shook my head. You're imagining things, Naomi. Maybe the first was. Maybe the silence was making me notice things that weren't there. Or maybe some places carry so much emotion that your mind begins filling in the spaces left behind. Either way, I refused to let my imagination get ahead of my professionalism. I returned to measuring the dining room. 24 feet, 11 inches. As I knelt near one corner of the room, something caught my attention beneath a sideboard. A small, blue marble. I reached underneath and rolled it into my palm. It was scratched from years of use. Not valuable, just loved. Children rarely lose toys in homes they never played in. I turned the marble over between my fingers, before placing it gently on the sideboard, where it would be easier to find. Some things deserve to be returned to the light. A few moments later, the front door opened again. Ben stepped inside, slipping his phone into his pocket. I'm sorry about that. No problem. His eyes landed on the marble. For the first time since we'd met, every trace of color left his face. He walked over slowly and picked it up with surprising care. I haven't seen this in years, he murmured. It was under the sideboard. He stared at it for several long seconds before giving a faint smile that looked as though it hurt. My daughter used to think she'd lost this forever. Maybe she'll be happy to see it again. I hope so. Hope, not certainty. Just hope. That single word revealed more than he probably intended. He slipped the marble into his shirt pocket instead of putting it away. It rested close to his heart. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Sometimes silence isn't awkward. Sometimes it's respectful. As the afternoon drifted toward evening, we returned to discussing paint samples, lighting fixtures, and renovation schedules. Everything sounded normal again. Practical, predictable. Yet beneath every conversation flowed an unspoken current neither of us acknowledged. This house wasn't resisting renovation because it feared change. It was waiting for someone to understand what it had been protecting all these years. I didn't know what that was yet. But as I packed away my measuring tape and notebook, I found myself looking down the quiet hallway one last time. For the briefest moment, I could have sworn I saw the slightest movement near the end of it. Not a person. Not exactly. More like the shadow of a memory disappearing around the corner. I blinked. It was gone. And somehow, that unsettled me even more. The drive back to my apartment should have cleared my mind. Instead, it only made the questions louder. Why had Ben hesitated when I asked about the piano? Why did that family photograph feel less like a memory on display, and more like a life paused in the middle of a sentence? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that the house wasn't empty at all? By the time I reached home, the Seattle sky had turned the soft grey it wore so often. Rain tapped gently against my windows while I unpacked my notebook and reviewed the measurements I'd taken. Everything about the renovation seemed straightforward. Replace the flooring in the upstairs hallway. Open the kitchen to bring in more natural light. Restore the fireplace. Modernize the guest bathrooms. It should have been just another project. But instead of sketching floor plans, I found myself drawing the layout of the house from memory. The music room. The hallway. The dining room. The locked rhythm of Ben's daily routines. My grandmother used to say, when something keeps returning to your mind, don't ask why you can't forget it. Ask what it's trying to teach you. At the time, I thought she was talking about people. Years later, I realized she could have been talking about places too. Monday morning arrived cool and misty. As I pulled into the long gravel driveway, I noticed Ben already outside, trimming a rosebush near the front porch. He wore faded jeans and a navy sweatshirt instead of the tailored clothes I'd expected from a CEO. For a moment, he didn't look like the man whose face appeared in business magazines. He looked like someone trying to keep busy. "Good morning," he called with an easy smile. "Morning? You found the place again. I don't usually lose houses." That earned a quiet laugh. "I suppose that's true." There it was again. That laugh, unforced, almost boyish. It reminded me that titles can hide people, but they can never erase them. Inside, the house greeted me with the same comforting scent of cedar and fresh coffee. I stopped. Fresh coffee. Again. Ben noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" "I thought I smelled coffee." "I made a pot before you arrived." He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a cup. Reasonable. Completely reasonable. I silently scolded myself for reading too much into ordinary things. Not every mystery deserved to become one. The renovation crew wouldn't arrive until after lunch, leaving me a few quiet hours to photograph every room before construction began. I worked methodically. Living room, dining room, office, guest suite. Every photograph captured beautiful architecture. Yet every room also carried something harder to define. Expectation. As if the house itself still expected someone to walk through the front door. Around noon, Ben received another work call. "I hate doing this," he said, slipping his phone from his pocket. "Business doesn't stop just because I'm trying to renovate a house." "I understand. I'll be in my office if you need me." The moment he disappeared upstairs, the house became incredibly still. I continued photographing the hallway. Click, click, click. Each shutter echoed softly. When I lowered my camera, something caught my attention. Near the back entrance, a faint line of dried mud. At first, I assumed one of us had tracked it in. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a single mark. It was a footprint. Small, much smaller than either mine or Ben's. Then another, and another. A trail. The prints crossed the hardwood floor before disappearing toward the hallway. I frowned. That didn't make sense. It hadn't rained since yesterday morning. The floors had been spotless when I arrived. Slowly, I followed them. Each tiny footprint was spaced just far enough apart to suggest a child walking at an unhurried pace. My heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with confusion. They ended outside the music room. No return prints, just gone. I crouched to study them more closely. The mud was dry enough to crumble beneath my fingertip. Real, not imagined. "Naomi?" Ben's voice startled me. I stood and stepped aside. He looked down at the footprints. His expression changed instantly. Not panic, not surprise, recognition. For several long seconds, he didn't speak. Finally, he walked to the hallway closet, removed a cleaning cloth, and knelt beside the first print. Without a word, he gently wiped it away, one after another, until nothing remained. I watched quietly. "You don't seem surprised," I said softly. He continued cleaning. "Old houses collect dirt. These weren't random. No. They looked like a child's footprints." The cloth stopped moving. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then he looked up. My daughter used to run through this hallway after playing outside. Used to? He nodded. Years ago. His eyes drifted toward the now spotless floor. I suppose sometimes I still expect to see traces of her. There was no embarrassment in his voice, only longing. A different kind of silence settled between us. It wasn't the silence of hidden guilt. It was the silence of someone learning that love doesn't disappear simply because time passes. Some people mistake moving on for forgetting. They aren't the same thing. Forgetting erases. Healing remembers without letting the memory become a prison. As we stood together in the hallway, I realized Ben wasn't haunted by another woman. He was haunted by the life he believed he'd failed to protect. The mystery of the house suddenly felt less frightening and far more heartbreaking. Still, one question refused to leave me. If those footprints existed only in memory, why had the mud been real? Before we continue to Chapter 2, I want to hear from you. If you walked into a house like this and found those tiny muddy footprints after the owner insisted no one else lived there, what would you think? Would you believe Ben was hiding something? Or would you feel there was a deeper story waiting to be uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to know your theory before the mystery unfolds. If this story has already captured your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Trust me, the house hasn't revealed its biggest secret yet. I didn't mention the footprints again, not because I'd forgotten them, because I couldn't. For the rest of that afternoon, they lingered in the back of my mind like the final line of a song you can't stop humming. Every time I looked down the hallway, I half expected to see another tiny trail appear across the polished hardwood floors. It never did. Instead, the house returned to its quiet rhythm. The renovation crew arrived just after lunch, filling the rooms with the familiar sounds of measuring tapes snapping, ladders unfolding, and conversations bouncing from one end of the house to the other. The silence I'd noticed during my first visit disappeared beneath the noise of progress. Yet somehow, the house still felt as though it were listening. By late afternoon, we had finalized the first phase of the renovation. The crew packed up for the day, promising to return early the next morning. As the last truck disappeared down the driveway, Ben walked onto the back deck carrying 2 mugs of coffee. I figured you've earned this. I accepted one with a grateful smile. I'll never turn down good coffee. We stood overlooking the lake. The water shimmered beneath the fading sunlight, while a family of ducks glided quietly across its surface. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Some silences demand to be filled. Others become conversations all by themselves. This place is beautiful, I finally said. It wasn't always. I turned toward him. What do you mean? When we bought it, the roof leaked, the dock was falling apart, and every room needed work. You restored it. He nodded. My ex-wife believed old things deserved another chance. I smiled. I think she and I would have gotten along. So do I. His answer carried no bitterness, only respect. It struck me how unusual that was. I've met people who could spend hours listing every reason their past relationships failed. Very few are willing to acknowledge the good that once existed. Maybe that's one of the first signs of healing, not pretending someone never hurt you, but refusing to let the hurt erase everything they gave you. She must have loved this view, I said. She did. And your daughter? Ben looked toward the lake before answering. Emily used to spend entire summers jumping off that dock. His face softened into a smile that reached his eyes. She'd challenge me to swimming races. Who usually won? He laughed. She'll tell you she did. And what will you tell me? I'll tell you she probably let me believe I had a chance. For the first time since meeting him, I could picture the man he had once been. Not the CEO. Not the disciplined executive who measured every word. Just a father laughing beside the lake with his little girl. Success had changed many things about Ben Sullivan. Love had changed him first. You miss her, I said quietly. Every day. Does she know that? The question escaped before I could stop it. Ben stared into his coffee. I don't know. You've never told her? I've told her I'm proud of her. That's not what I asked. He didn't answer. Sometimes the hardest conversations aren't the ones we have with other people. They're the ones we've been avoiding with ourselves. As an interior designer, I'd learned that restoring a home requires tearing away damaged layers before rebuilding stronger ones. People aren't so different. Healing begins the moment we're willing to uncover what we've spent years covering up. The next morning, I arrived before anyone else. Seattle's air carried the crisp scent of pine after a light overnight drizzle. The front door was unlocked. Ben had texted me earlier, running to the hardware store. Make yourself at home. I smiled. There was something oddly comforting about those last 4 words. Make yourself at home. Few people realized what they were truly offering when they said that. A home isn't just a place where you're allowed to enter. It's a place where you're trusted. I stepped inside and placed my bag near the staircase. The house greeted me with familiar stillness. Then something caught my attention. Fresh white lilies. I stopped in the middle of the kitchen. The vase on the island held a completely new arrangement. Yesterday's flowers were gone. These were freshly cut. Tiny droplets of water still clung to their stems. I leaned closer. They smelled exactly like the bouquet from my first visit. Strange. Ben had left for the hardware store over an hour ago. Had he replaced them before leaving? Probably. Yet something about their timing unsettled me. Who replaces fresh flowers every single day? Before I could think any further, my phone buzzed. It was my younger brother, Marcus. "Hey, big sister. You're calling before 9 in the morning. Should I be worried?" He laughed. "No, I just wanted to hear your voice. You usually text." "I know." There was a pause. "Mom's birthday is next week." The smile faded from my face. "I know. You coming home?" "I haven't decided." "You've been saying that for 3 years." His words weren't cruel, just honest. After our mother's passing, home had become the one place I couldn't bring myself to visit. Every room reminded me of conversations I'd never get to have again. "I'll think about it," I said softly. Marcus sighed. "Naomi, memories don't become easier just because we avoid them." After we hung up, I remained standing in the kitchen. His words echoed through my heart. Maybe that's why Ben's house affected me so deeply. It wasn't just preserving his memories. It was forcing me to confront my own. Perhaps that's what homes do when we're finally ready to listen. They remind us that grief isn't proof we loved too much. It's proof that what we had mattered. And things that matter are always worth remembering. Just then, I heard Ben's truck pulling into the driveway. I glanced one last time at the lilies before walking toward the front door. For reasons I couldn't explain, I had the distinct feeling that those flowers weren't the mystery. They were a message. I just hadn't learned how to read it yet. Ben carried 2 long boxes through the front door before I could offer to help. "I thought I told you to wait for me." "I've never been very good at waiting." "I can see that." He laughed as he set the boxes on the kitchen island. "I picked up the new light fixtures. They're exactly what you recommended." "You trusted my judgment?" "I hired you because I trust your judgment." His answer was simple, matter of fact. Yet something about hearing those words warmed me more than I expected. Trust isn't built through grand gestures. It grows in quiet moments, one honest decision at a time. As the crew arrived, the house quickly came alive. Hammers echoed through the foyer. Protective sheets covered the floors. Dust floated through shafts of morning sunlight as old trim was carefully removed. Watching craftsmen restore an old home had always reminded me of something my mother used to say. People aren't broken because they have cracks. They're broken only when they stop believing those cracks can be repaired. For years I thought she was talking about furniture. Now I knew she had been talking about people. By noon, the kitchen was filled with samples of wood, tile, and paint. Ben studied each one carefully. "You've done this before," I teased. "I negotiate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So choosing between 2 shades of white shouldn't be difficult." He smiled. "You'd be surprised." I held up 2 paint cards. "They look identical." "They're not." He narrowed his eyes. "They're slightly different." I laughed. "Congratulations. You've officially become every homeowner." His shoulders relaxed as he laughed with me. For a brief moment, the weight he carried seemed lighter. Success had taught Ben how to solve complex business problems. But life had quietly been teaching him a harder lesson. Some decisions aren't about being right. They're about being present. Later that afternoon, while the contractors worked upstairs, I began organizing the built-in cabinets in the family room. Most were empty. Others held neatly labeled storage boxes. One box sat apart from the others. There was no label, only a layer of fine dust. I hesitated. Professional boundaries mattered. This wasn't my home. It wasn't my place to go searching through someone's past. As I reached to move the box aside, the lid shifted slightly. Something slipped onto the floor. A folded sheet of paper. I picked it up carefully. It wasn't a letter. It was a child's drawing. A house beside a lake. 3 smiling stick figures holding hands. Above them, written in uneven crayon letters, were the words, "My favorite place in the world." In one corner, a little girl had written, "Daddy, Mummy, and me." I stared at the drawing for a long moment. Children have a remarkable way of telling the truth without realizing it. Their pictures aren't concerned with perfection, only with what feels safe. I gently brushed a speck of dust from the page. "Emily was 7. Ben's voice came quietly from behind me. I turned, startled. I'm sorry. It fell out. I know. He walked over and accepted the drawing with extraordinary care, as though it were made of glass. She drew this after our first summer here. It's beautiful. He nodded. She insisted we frame it. So why wasn't it framed? A faint smile touched his face. Because she changed her mind. What happened? She said it belonged in the memory box. He looked down at the drawing again. So we'll never lose it, she told me. He laughed softly, but his eyes glistened. Children think memories disappear unless we protect them. And adults? We usually pretend we don't need protecting. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I asked the question that had quietly followed me since the day we met. Ben, why did your marriage end? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the large front window overlooking the lake. I used to believe providing for my family was the greatest way to love them. It isn't. It's one way. He sighed. But somewhere along the line, I confused providing with being present. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. I never missed a mortgage payment. He paused. I missed birthdays. Silence settled between us. I never forgot to renew an insurance policy. Another pause. But I forgot how important it was to sit on the floor and finish a puzzle with my daughter. He looked toward the dock. I kept promising there would be more time. His voice grew quieter. There wasn't. The room felt impossibly still. I realized then that regret has a peculiar sound. It doesn't shout. It whispers the words we wish we had spoken years ago. My wife never asked me to choose between my career and our family, Ben continued. She only asked me to come home, while there was still something worth coming home to. He swallowed hard. I didn't understand what she meant until it was too late. No anger, no blame, only responsibility. That kind of honesty is rare. It's much easier to point at someone else's mistakes than to admit our own. I appreciate you telling me. I've spent years avoiding conversations like this. What changed? He smiled sadly. You asked. The answer stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. Sometimes people aren't waiting for perfect advice. They're waiting for someone willing to listen without judgment. As the crew packed up for the evening, I walked through the nearly empty family room one final time. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the floor. Everything felt peaceful. Then I noticed it. On the windowsill beside the family room sat a tiny glass jar. Inside were dozens of smooth stones. Each one had a date written in black marker. Curious, I picked up the jar. The oldest stone read, July 14th. Another, August 2nd. Another, September 18th. Every stone carried a different date. No explanation, no labels, just dates. Ben stepped into the room. His eyes settled on the jar. He smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile this time. Emily started that tradition. What do the dates mean? Every time something wonderful happened here, she'd pick up a stone from the lake and write the date on it. He picked up one of the stones. This one was the day she learned to ride her bike. Another. This one was the first fish she ever caught. He placed it back gently. She said, happy memories deserve something solid to hold on to. I looked at the jar, suddenly understanding why Ben had never thrown it away. People often believe memories live in photographs. Sometimes, they live in ordinary objects that everyone else overlooks. As I carefully returned the jar to the windowsill, something else caught my eye. Near the back door, resting against the baseboard, was a tiny, red rain boot. Just one, small enough for a 6-year-old. Perfectly clean, perfectly placed. I frowned. I was certain it hadn't been there a few minutes earlier. Ben? I turned toward him. Did one of the contractors bring a child today? He looked toward the boot. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. Very quietly, he whispered, no. His eyes never left it. That belonged to Emily. The room fell silent. My heart began to race, because I had walked past that exact spot 3 separate times that afternoon. And I would have sworn, with complete certainty, the little red boot hadn't been there before. Neither of us moved. The little red rain boot rested against the baseboard, bright enough to draw every bit of attention in the room. Ben walked toward it slowly, not with fear, with recognition. He bent down, picked it up carefully, and brushed an invisible speck of dust from the rubber toe. I wondered where this had gone, he said quietly. I looked at the space where it had been lying. I don't understand. He glanced toward the stack of protective boards the contractors had leaned against the wall earlier that morning. It must have been behind those. I followed his eyes. Now that the boards had been carried outside, the narrow space behind them was completely exposed. A small rush of relief washed over me. There was an explanation after all. Not every mystery needed to become something impossible. Still, that didn't explain why the sight of the boot had changed Ben's expression so completely. He held it in both hands for a long moment before letting out a slow breath. Emily hated wearing matching shoes. I smiled. What? If she lost one, she'd wear 2 different colors until we found it. Despite himself, Ben chuckled. My ex-wife used to say our daughter treated getting dressed like an art project. I laughed. I've known children like that. They're exhausting. And unforgettable. His smile lingered. Yes, unforgettable. The contractors called from upstairs, asking me to look at a section of damaged flooring. I should get back to work, I said. Ben nodded, but before I turned away, he stopped me. Naomi? Yes? Thank you. Sorry, for what? For treating these things like memories instead of clutter. His words stayed with me as I climbed the staircase. There is a difference between clearing a house and erasing a life. The best renovations don't remove every trace of the past. They preserve what deserves to remain while making room for tomorrow. That afternoon, we began removing sections of damaged flooring from the upstairs hallway. Most of the work was routine until one of the crew members called my name. Naomi, you should probably see this. I crossed the hallway. What is it? He pointed beneath one of the floor vents. We found something. Nestled inside the narrow space beneath the vent cover lay a tiny silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. One of the workers picked it up. Looks old. I accepted it carefully. It was no bigger than my thumb. Not a house key. Not a car key. Something much smaller. A diary? A keepsake box? I turned it over in my hand. Stamped into the metal were 2 tiny letters. E.S. Emily Sullivan. I looked toward Ben. He had gone completely still. I haven't seen that in. He stopped himself. A very long time. Do you know what it opens? A faint smile crossed his face. I think I do. His voice carried neither excitement nor dread, only quiet certainty. He slipped the little key into his pocket. I'll show you tomorrow. Tomorrow? He nodded. Some memories deserve one more night before they're opened. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I simply said, I'll be here. As the sun dipped lower over the lake, I packed away my notebook. Before leaving, I stood for a moment in the foyer, studying the house one more time. On my first visit, I thought it was hiding another person. Now I understood something different. The house wasn't protecting secrets. It was protecting moments. Every photograph, every marble, every drawing, every flower, every forgotten toy. Each one whispered the same lesson. Love leaves evidence. Not because it wants us to stay trapped in the past, but because it hopes we'll remember what mattered enough to carry into the future. As I stepped outside, I glanced back through the front window. Ben was standing alone in the hallway. His hand rested over the pocket, holding Emily's tiny silver key. He wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at the life he'd spent years convincing himself he no longer deserved. And somehow, I had a feeling that whatever the little key unlocked, it wasn't just a box. It was the first door inside Ben Sullivan's heart that had been closed for far too long. I barely slept that night. Not because of the key itself, because of what Ben had said. Some memories deserve one more night before they're opened. The sentence lingered in my thoughts long after I'd turned off the lights. Most people think healing happens the moment we're ready to let go. I've learned it often begins the moment we're finally ready to look. The next morning, I arrived at the lake house just before 8. Seattle greeted the day with a blanket of low clouds drifting lazily across the water. The air smelled of rain, cedar, and freshly cut grass. Ben was already waiting on the porch. He held 2 travel mugs. I guessed your coffee order. You don't even know my coffee order. I took a chance. I accepted the mug and took a sip. Dark roast. 1 splash of oat milk. Exactly how I liked it. I raised an eyebrow. You guessed correctly. He smiled. I paid attention. It was such a small sentence, yet it carried more warmth than any compliment. People often believe love begins with grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it begins with noticing how someone takes their coffee, which songs make them smile, when they're pretending they're okay. The renovation crew wouldn't arrive for another hour. Ben nodded toward the staircase. Come with me. I followed him upstairs. Instead of stopping at the office or the music room, he walked farther down the hallway until we reached the last bedroom. The same bedroom I'd quietly wondered about since my first visit. Ben slipped the tiny silver key from his pocket. It doesn't unlock this room, he said. It unlocks something inside it. He crossed to an old white dresser tucked beneath the window. The furniture had clearly belonged to another time. Its paint had faded around the edges, and the brass handles had grown dull with age. He opened the top drawer. Folded sweaters, a stuffed rabbit, a handful of colored pencils. At the very back rested a small wooden box no larger than a jewelry case. Its brass lock matched the tiny silver key perfectly. Ben hesitated. I haven't opened this since Emily was 12. You don't have to if you're not ready. He looked at me. For the first time in years, I think I finally am. The key turned with a gentle click. Neither of us spoke. Inside were dozens of folded notes, construction paper hearts, friendship bracelets, ticket stubs, photographs. The ordinary treasures children collect without realizing they'll one day become priceless. Ben picked up one of the folded notes. His hands trembled slightly. It says, "Open on a bad day." He smiled through watery eyes. I remember this. You don't have to read it aloud. I think I should. He unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was large and uneven, clearly written by a little girl. Daddy, if you're sad because work is hard, remember you always tell me that hard things don't last forever. Also, I think you're the best dad, even when you miss my soccer games, because I know you're trying. But next time, please, come. Love, Emily. The room became perfectly still. Ben stared at the letter without speaking. Then he folded it again with extraordinary care. I came home early that night, he whispered. But she'd already gone to bed. He closed his eyes. I thought there would be another game. His voice cracked. There wasn't. I didn't try to comfort him with easy words. Some pain deserves witnesses, not solutions. After several moments, Ben reached back into the box. There were dozens more letters, each labeled in colorful marker. Open when you're lonely. Open when you forget to laugh. Open when you miss me. His shoulders shook as he quietly laughed through tears. She planned for my future better than I ever did. I felt my own eyes sting. Children rarely love halfway. They love completely, without measuring, without keeping score, without wondering whether they'll receive the same amount in return. There's something profoundly educational about that kind of love. Adults spend years learning the conditions that children never naturally create. Ben handed me another photograph. Emily, no older than 9, sat on the dock with a fishing pole nearly twice her height. Beside her sat Ben. Neither was looking at the camera. Both were laughing. You look happy, I said. I was. What changed? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the bedroom. I started believing I had to earn moments like these. He swallowed hard. I kept telling myself I'd spend more time with my family after the next promotion, after the next contract, after the company stabilized. He smiled sadly. The finish line kept moving. Outside, I heard the first contractor's truck pull into the driveway. The workday was beginning. Life, as always, was moving forward. Ben gently closed the wooden box. I'm not putting this back in the drawer. What will you do with it? He looked around the room before answering. I think it's time Emily's memories became part of the house again, instead of something hidden inside it. A quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't a dramatic decision. No speeches. No grand transformation. Just one small choice. But healing often arrives exactly like that. One honest decision. Then another, then another. As we walked downstairs together, I noticed something different about Ben. His shoulders seemed lighter. Not because his grief had disappeared, because he had finally stopped carrying it alone. I had come to this house believing I was here to restore old wood, cracked walls and outdated rooms. Standing beside Ben that morning, I realized something far more important. Sometimes the greatest renovation isn't the one happening inside a house. It's the one quietly beginning inside a human heart. And neither of us knew it yet. But opening that little wooden box was only the beginning. Before this renovation was over, another discovery would force both of us to confront a truth neither of us had been ready to face. Not about the house, about ourselves. Over the next 2 weeks, the house slowly began to change. The old wallpaper came down. Fresh paint brightened rooms that had spent years hidden beneath darker colors. Sunlight reached corners that hadn't felt warm in a long time. It amazed me how little changes could transform an entire space. Life, I realized, worked much the same way. We often wait for dramatic moments to change us, when more often it's the small, consistent choices that quietly rebuild who we are. Ben and I settled into an easy routine. Every morning, I arrived just before 8. Every morning, he greeted me with coffee. Not because he had to, because he'd remembered. Some mornings we talked about design. Other mornings we stood on the porch overlooking the lake without saying much at all. I discovered something surprising about Ben. Silence didn't make him uncomfortable. Dishonesty did. One Wednesday afternoon, we were sorting through books that would eventually be moved into custom-built shelves. Do you organize books by author or by subject? I asked. He looked genuinely puzzled. Is there a correct answer? There are about 100 correct answers. And how many wrong ones? I smiled. Just one. He folded his arms. And what's that? Buying books only because they look good. He laughed. I've definitely done that. I knew it. How? You still have the price sticker inside one of them. He shook his head, laughing harder. I was hoping you'd think I was more sophisticated. I already do. He looked at me with quiet curiosity, even after catching me pretending to be well-read. Especially after. He tilted his head. I don't understand. Because pretending to know everything is exhausting. Admitting you don't, that's refreshing. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said softly, I've spent most of my career pretending I had all the answers. And did it make life easier? No. What did it do? It made asking for help feel like failure. His words settled between us. I thought about how many people carried that same burden. They believed strength meant never struggling, never crying, never admitting they were overwhelmed. But real strength isn't the absence of weakness. It's having the courage to face it honestly. That afternoon, while measuring a built-in cabinet near the fireplace, I noticed something tucked behind the lowest shelf. A small stack of greeting cards. Most were homemade. The front of one read, Happy Father's Day. Another simply said, To the world's best dad. I carefully handed them to Ben. I think these belong to you. He looked down at the cards before smiling quietly. Emily loved making these. You kept every one. I couldn't imagine throwing them away. He opened the oldest card. Inside, written in oversized purple marker, were the words, Dad, thank you for teaching me how to skip rocks. You're my favorite adventure. Love, Emily. Ben traced the handwriting with his thumb. You know what I remember most? He asked. What? I thought the best part of that day was teaching her to skip stones. He smiled sadly. But years later, she told me her favorite part was that I left my phone in the truck. He looked out toward the lake. I didn't realize my attention had become a gift. Neither of us spoke. The lesson didn't need explaining. In a world that constantly competes for our attention, giving someone your full presence may be one of the greatest acts of love. A little later, the doorbell rang. Ben frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find an elderly woman standing on the porch with a freshly baked peach pie. Her silver hair peeked out beneath a knitted hat, and her warm smile lit up her face the moment she saw Ben. I figured the workers might be hungry. Ben laughed. Mrs. Donnelly, you didn't have to do this. I know. She looked past him and spotted me. And who might you be? I'm Naomi. She stepped forward and shook my hand. So, you're the young woman bringing this old house back to life. I'm trying. Mrs. Donnelly smiled knowingly. Houses are easier than hearts. Ben rubbed the back of his neck. You always know how to embarrass me. I've known you for nearly 20 years, she replied. You've been embarrassed before. We all laughed. She placed the pie on the kitchen counter before turning to leave. At the door, she paused. Benjamin, he looked up. Don't spend so much time fixing walls that you forget to open the windows. He smiled. I'll remember. After she left, I looked at him. What did she mean by that? He watched the pie sitting on the counter. I think... He paused thoughtfully. She meant people need fresh air too. I wasn't entirely convinced that was what Mrs. Donnelly had meant. But I also sensed Ben wasn't ready to explore the deeper meaning. Not yet. As evening approached, and the crew packed away their tools, I stepped outside to breathe in the cool lakeside air. The setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and amber. Behind me, I heard the front door open. Ben joined me on the porch. Long day. The good kind. He leaned against the railing. I haven't heard this much laughter in this house for a long time. I smiled. Maybe the house missed it. He looked at me for a moment, before quietly replying, maybe I did. The breeze stirred the cedar trees around us. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called into the evening. Neither of us hurried to fill the silence. Because sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen when two people simply allow themselves to share the same peaceful moment. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at the screen. Chicago Design Group. My heartbeat slowed. I had completely forgotten I'd applied months earlier. The subject line read, We'd like to schedule your final interview. I stared at the message. Then I looked back at the warmly lit house behind me. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure what I wanted, and that uncertainty frightened me far more than any mystery the house had ever held. I didn't answer the email that night, not because I wasn't interested, because I wasn't sure whether I was still the woman who had submitted the application months earlier. Back then, accepting a job in Chicago had seemed like the obvious next step. Bigger city, bigger projects, bigger opportunities. I'd built my entire career believing growth always meant moving on. Now, for the first time, I wondered if growth sometimes meant staying long enough to discover why a place had found its way into your heart. The next morning, I arrived at the lake house carrying that question with me. Ben was already outside, kneeling beside a flower bed with gardening gloves on his hands. "You've made friends with the roses," I said. He smiled without looking up. "They're less demanding than people." "I don't know. Roses can be pretty unforgiving." He laughed. "You might be right." As I set my bag down, I noticed several fresh white lilies waiting beside the porch steps. "You bought more flowers." "I do every Friday." He said it so casually that I almost let it pass. "Every Friday?" He nodded. "It became a habit." "For someone special?" His hands paused over the soil. "My mother." He stood slowly and brushed the dirt from his jeans. "When I was growing up, she always kept fresh flowers in the house." He looked toward the front window. "She used to say, a home should greet people with beauty before it greeted them with words." I smiled. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. He picked up the lilies. After she passed away, I couldn't bring myself to stop buying them. There was no shame in his confession, only tenderness. Grief has a strange way of preserving love through ordinary rituals. Some people wear a wedding ring long after losing a spouse. Some cook recipes that belonged to a parent. Some buy flowers every Friday because stopping would feel like saying the love no longer mattered. The lesson settled quietly in my heart. Healing doesn't always mean letting go of every habit. Sometimes it means understanding why the habit exists. Inside, the renovation was beginning to reveal the home's new personality. The walls looked brighter. The restored hardwood floors reflected the morning sunlight. The house wasn't losing its history. It was learning to breathe again. As I reviewed the day's schedule with the crew, Ben disappeared into his office for a virtual board meeting. Around noon, I heard raised voices drifting through the slightly open office door. Not angry, tense. "I understand the numbers," Ben said firmly. "But we're talking about people, not spreadsheets." A pause. "No, I won't approve layoffs just because it's the fastest solution." Another pause. "If we're asking employees to sacrifice, leadership should sacrifice first." The room fell silent. A few moments later, the meeting ended. Ben stepped into the hallway looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded automatically. Then he caught himself. "The honest answer? I'd rather hear that." He leaned against the wall and sighed. "Some days I wonder if doing the right thing is always supposed to feel this heavy." "It usually does." He looked at me curiously. "Why do you say that?" "Because the easiest choice and the right choice are rarely the same." He smiled faintly. "My father used to tell me something similar." "What did he say?" "Character is measured by the decisions no one applauds." We stood there quietly for a moment. Success had taught Ben how to make profitable decisions. Life was teaching him how to make meaningful ones. That afternoon, we worked together in the library, deciding which shelves should stay and which should be rebuilt. As Ben reached for a box on the highest shelf, an old photograph slipped free and landed at my feet. He bent to pick it up, then paused. "Go ahead," he said. I looked at the picture. It showed 3 people sitting on the dock. Ben, his former wife, Emily, laughing with her feet dangling over the water. No one was looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. "It feels real," I said. It was. "You can tell when people aren't posing." He nodded. "That was one of the last summers before work started taking over my life." He stared at the photograph for several seconds. "I spent years looking at this picture and thinking about everything I lost." He glanced at me. "Now I think about everything I was lucky enough to have." I smiled. "That's a different kind of grief." "Is it?" "Yes." "How?" "The first keeps you trapped in yesterday." I gently handed the photograph back. "The second helps you become grateful that yesterday existed at all." He looked at me as though he'd never considered that possibility. "Naomi." "Yeah?" "I think you're helping renovate more than my house." His words caught me completely off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was honest. Then my phone vibrated inside my pocket. Chicago Design Group. Final interview confirmation. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Virtual. I stared at the screen. Ben noticed my expression. "Everything all right?" I forced a smile. "Just a career decision I've been avoiding." "You don't have to tell me." "I know, but maybe I should." He waited patiently while I gathered my thoughts. I applied for a position in Chicago months ago. His expression remained calm. They want a final interview. Congratulations. I searched his face for disappointment. Instead, I found sincerity. You worked hard for that. I don't even know if I want it anymore. Why not? I looked around the house. The workers, the sunlight, the quiet lake beyond the windows, then back at him. Because, somewhere along the way, I hesitated. This project stopped feeling like another job. His eyes met mine. And started feeling like? I smiled softly. Like something I wasn't expecting to find. He didn't ask another question. He didn't pressure me to explain. Sometimes, the greatest kindness we can offer another person is giving them room to understand their own heart. As the sun dipped lower over the lake, we stood together on the porch once more. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. The breeze carried the scent of cedar and fresh lilies through the evening air. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my next destination. I was paying attention to where I already was. And although I couldn't have explained it then, I sensed that life was quietly teaching both of us the same lesson. The places worth calling home aren't always the ones we planned to find. Sometimes, they're the ones that slowly teach us how to stop running. The interview was 3 days away. 3 days. 72 hours shouldn't have been enough to change the direction of a life. Yet every time I looked at the calendar on my laptop, the numbers seemed to ask the same question. What are you really afraid of? I told myself I was afraid of making the wrong decision. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I had made difficult decisions before. Ending relationships, moving to new cities, starting my own business. None of those choices had frightened me the way this one did. Because this time, I wasn't choosing between two jobs. I was choosing between the woman I'd spent years becoming and the woman I was beginning to discover. The following morning, rain settled gently over Seattle. Tiny drops gathered on the cedar branches surrounding Ben's home, making the entire property shimmer beneath the grey sky. I parked near the garage and hurried toward the front porch, shielding my sketchbook beneath my jacket. Before I could knock, the front door opened. Ben stood there holding an umbrella. You looked like you might need this. I smiled. You've been watching through the window? I saw your car. You didn't have to come outside. I know. He opened the umbrella above us anyway. It's raining. The gesture lasted less than a minute. Yet something about it stayed with me all day. Love rarely begins with declarations. It begins with consideration. Remembering someone's favorite coffee, opening a door, sharing an umbrella, paying attention. Inside, the crew had the day off while newly installed hardwood floors cured. For the first time since the renovation began, the house belonged only to the two of us. The silence felt different now. Not lonely. Peaceful. Ben carried his coffee into the living room while I spread updated floor plans across the dining table. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous way to start a conversation. He laughed. I deserve that. What have you been thinking about? This house. I looked around the room. What about it? I spent years trying to preserve it exactly as it was. He slowly walked toward the large front window overlooking the lake. I thought changing anything meant losing the memories. And now? He rested one hand on the window frame. Now I realize memories don't live inside walls. He turned toward me. They live inside people. I smiled. That's a lesson most people learn too late. I almost did. His honesty had become one of the things I admired most about him. He no longer spoke like someone trying to impress the world. He spoke like someone trying to understand himself. Growth has a quiet voice. It doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself one honest sentence at a time. Around noon, the rain finally eased. We decided to walk down to the dock. The lake stretched before us like polished glass. Everything felt still. Ben reached into a weathered storage bench and pulled out 2 old fishing rods. You fish? I asked. Poorly. Then why keep the rods? They remind me not to measure every day by what I catch. I raised an eyebrow. That's unexpectedly philosophical. He chuckled. My grandfather taught me to fish. He handed me one of the rods. The first day we came out here, I caught absolutely nothing. What did he say? Ben smiled at the memory. He said, Benjamin, the fish aren't the reason we came. I looked toward the calm water. What was the reason? Because one day you'll realize the people beside you matter more than whatever you're chasing. He paused. I didn't understand him until years after he was gone. There it was again. Another lesson hidden inside an ordinary memory. Life has a remarkable way of teaching us the same truth from different directions. Relationships are rarely strengthened by extraordinary moments. They're strengthened by ordinary moments we choose not to rush through. We never cast the fishing lines. Instead, we sat side by side on the edge of the dock, our feet dangling above the water. "I've never asked," Ben said after a while. "Asked what?" "Why interior design?" I laughed softly. "Most people assume it's because I like decorating." I assumed the same. I actually studied architecture first. "What changed?" I looked across the lake before answering. "My mother." He waited patiently. "After my dad passed away, she couldn't afford to move." I swallowed gently. "So she stayed in the same little house for 30 years. That must have been difficult." It was. But every few years she'd paint a room, rearrange furniture, or plant flowers outside. I smiled. I asked her once why she kept changing the house. What did she say? "Because pain shouldn't be the first thing that greets me when I walk through my own front door." Ben remained quiet. "So that's why you restore homes?" I nodded. I realized people don't always need a new life. They just need to believe the life they already have can become beautiful again. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The breeze rippled gently across the lake. Finally, Ben broke the silence. "I wish I'd met your mother." "You would have liked her." "I think she would have challenged me." "Oh, definitely." He laughed. "She believed successful people often confuse being busy with being important." Ben smiled knowingly. "She sounds frighteningly wise." She usually was. The laughter faded into another comfortable silence. Then Ben asked the question I hadn't expected. "Are you still thinking about Chicago?" I looked down at the calm water. "Every day." "And?" "I still don't know." He nodded slowly. "I hope whatever you choose." He hesitated. "It's because it brings you peace. Not because it impresses people. Not because it pays more. Not because it looks successful from the outside. Peace." That single word settled somewhere deep inside me. For years, I'd chased achievement. When had I stopped asking whether I was chasing joy? As we stood to head back toward the house, I noticed an elderly couple walking hand in hand along the shoreline. Neither seemed to be saying much. They simply walked at the same pace, occasionally smiling at one another. I watched them until they disappeared around a bend in the trail. "What are you looking at?" Ben asked. "The future." He followed my gaze. "The couple?" I nodded. "They don't look like people trying to impress each other anymore. No. They look like people who finally understand each other." Ben smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what lasting love is." "What?" "Not finding someone perfect." He looked toward the path where the couple had disappeared. "Finding someone you're willing to keep learning for the rest of your life." His words lingered with me all the way back to the house. Because somewhere between restoring old floors and sharing quiet mornings over coffee, between conversations about flowers, memories, and fishing rods, I had stopped seeing Ben Sullivan as the client whose house I was renovating. Without realizing it, he had become the man who was quietly renovating the way I understood love. The house was changing faster than either of us expected. Fresh paint-covered walls that had carried years of quiet memories. The restored hardwood floors reflected the afternoon sunlight like still water. The old fireplace, once stained with soot and time, had become the heart of the living room again. Every room seemed to breathe a little easier. I only wished people could heal as quickly as houses. After our conversation on the dock, something shifted between Ben and me. Not in a dramatic way. There were no awkward silences, no arguments, no misunderstandings. Instead, we became more careful, almost as if we had both realized we were standing on the edge of something neither of us was ready to name. Ben still made coffee every morning. He still asked how I wanted the day's schedule arranged. He still listened whenever I explained why one design choice felt more welcoming than another. But he no longer lingered after our conversations. He always found another task, another email, another reason to step away. At first, I assumed I was imagining it. By the third day, I knew I wasn't. The distance wasn't cold. It was intentional. And somehow, that hurt more. On Thursday afternoon, I found him repairing one of the old wooden benches near the dock. "You know," I said, setting down a box of hardware, "most people would just buy a new bench." He smiled without looking up. "I know. So why fix this one?" He ran his hand across the weathered wood. "Because it's still strong." He tightened another screw before continuing. "It just needed someone willing to spend time on it." I folded my arms. "You're talking about the bench." "Aren't I?" I smiled, despite myself. He finally looked up. Then his expression softened. "Naomi, and, yeah? I hope I'm not making things uncomfortable." The question surprised me. "What makes you think you are?" "I've been keeping a little more distance." "So you've noticed?" "I have." "Why?" He set the screwdriver down and took a slow breath. Because I don't want your decision about Chicago to have anything to do with me. His honesty caught me completely off guard. I don't understand. You came here because of your career. I did. And if you stay. He searched for the right words. I never want you wondering whether you gave up your dream because of me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked quietly, what if my dream has changed? He looked away toward the lake. Then I hope it's because your heart changed. Well, not because I happened to be standing nearby. There it was. The reason for the distance. It wasn't fear of commitment. It was respect. He cared enough not to influence a decision that belonged to me. That realization changed something inside me. Real love doesn't demand sacrifice before it's earned. It gives the other person room to choose freely. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the Chicago interview confirmation. The cursor blinked over the button marked, Accept Interview. I should have clicked it immediately. Months ago I would have. Instead, I closed the laptop. Not because I had made a decision, because the first hadn't. Sometimes, wisdom isn't knowing the answer. Sometimes it's admitting you're still searching for one. The following morning, my younger brother Marcus called while I was driving to the lake house. You sound tired, he said. I've been thinking too much. About Chicago? How did you know? You only overthink things that matter. I laughed softly. Is it that obvious? To your little brother? Always. Traffic slowed near the waterfront. Marcus spoke again. Can I ask you something? You usually do. When was the last time you talked about a project the way you've been talking about this one? I frowned. What do you mean? You don't describe paint colors anymore. You've noticed that? You talk about people. I didn't answer. You've talked about Ben. Still, I remained quiet. Marcus didn't tease me. He simply asked, when you describe him, do you sound like someone who's found a client? Another pause. Or someone who's found peace? His question stayed with me long after the call ended. Peace. Ben had used that word on the dock. Now Marcus had unknowingly used it again. Maybe life repeats certain lessons until we're finally willing to hear them. When I arrived at the house, I found Ben standing in the front hallway, studying the newly restored staircase. What do you think? I asked. He smiled. I think you were right. About what? The house doesn't feel different because it's newer. He looked around slowly. It feels different because it feels lived in again. I followed his gaze. Fresh flowers on the entry table, warm light spilling through the windows, the faint smell of cedar and coffee. The renovation had never been about making the house perfect. It had been about making it welcoming. Ben turned toward me. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous habit. He laughed. I know. He slipped an envelope from his jacket pocket. I almost forgot. I accepted it. My final invoice? He shook his head. Open it. Inside was a handwritten note. Just one sentence. Thank you for helping me see my home again. I looked up. Ben. You've done more than renovate this place. His voice was steady. You reminded me that memories aren't something to hide from. Emotion tightened my throat. No expensive gift. No extravagant gesture. Just gratitude. Sometimes the most valuable thing another person can give us is the reassurance that our presence mattered. As the afternoon faded into evening, I slipped the note carefully into my sketchbook. I had a feeling I'd keep it for a very long time. What neither of us knew was that by this time next week, one phone call would force me to decide whether the life I had spent years planning was still the life I truly wanted. And for the first time in my adult life, the answer wasn't obvious. Before we continue to the next chapter, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Naomi's position, what would you choose? Would you pursue the dream you've worked toward for years, or would you stay and explore a connection that has quietly changed your heart? There's no right or wrong answer, and that's what makes this story so real. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'd love to know what you would do. If this chapter touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. The biggest decisions in life aren't always between what's good and what's bad. Sometimes, they're between what's familiar and what truly feels like home. The interview was scheduled for Tuesday morning. I told myself I wasn't nervous. That was only partly true. I wasn't nervous about answering questions. I was nervous about what my answers might reveal. For years, I'd measured success with a simple formula. Bigger city, bigger projects, bigger paycheck. It had never occurred to me that one day I might want something those things couldn't provide. On Monday afternoon, I turned the corner into Ben's driveway and immediately noticed something different. The moving trucks were gone. The contractors had finished restoring the front porch. For the first time since I'd accepted the project, there were no power tools humming, no ladders leaning against the walls, no stacks of lumber waiting to be installed. The house stood quietly beneath the tall cedar trees, almost complete. I sat in my car a little longer than usual. When a renovation ends, there's always a strange feeling. You're proud of what you've built, but you're also aware that your reason for showing up every morning is about to disappear. I wasn't ready to admit how much that thought unsettled me. Ben opened the front door before I reached the porch. "Good morning." "Morning." He studied my face for a second. "You didn't sleep much." I smiled. "Am I that easy to read?" "No." He stepped aside so I could enter. "I've just started paying closer attention." His words lingered with me all the way into the kitchen. Fresh lilies sat in their usual place on the island. The coffee was already brewed. Morning sunlight spilled across the restored hardwood floors, making the house feel warmer than it had only a few weeks earlier. It no longer felt frozen in time. It felt alive. Funny how houses and people often heal together. As I reviewed the final punch list, Ben placed a folder beside me. "I've been going through old paperwork. Find anything interesting?" He laughed softly. "Mostly receipts. I hope you kept them organized. You've clearly forgotten who you're talking to." "I could never." He smiled. Then his expression grew thoughtful. "I also found something else." He slid a folded photograph across the counter. It showed the house exactly as it had looked the year he bought it. The porch sagged. The paint had faded. The garden was overgrown. It looked tired. "This doesn't even look like the same place," I said. "It isn't." "You've changed it." He shook his head. "No." He looked around the kitchen. "We changed it." There was something quietly beautiful about the way he said we. Not possessive, not romantic, simply truthful. Growth rarely belongs to one person alone. Sometimes we become better because someone else believed we could. Around lunchtime, Mrs. Donnelly stopped by again, carrying a basket of fresh peaches from the farmer's market. "I figured you two have been working too hard to remember lunch." Ben laughed. "You've made it impossible for us to go hungry." "That's the idea." She handed me the basket before lowering her voice. "Can I borrow Benjamin for just a minute?" "I'll be in the library," I said. As I walked away, I couldn't help overhearing a few words drifting through the open kitchen doorway. "She seems good for you." A pause. Then Ben answered quietly. "She is." Another pause. "I'm just trying not to make this harder for her." Mrs. Donnelly's voice softened. "Sometimes we protect people so much that we accidentally keep them from knowing how much they matter." Silence followed. I deliberately stepped farther into the library. Some conversations deserve privacy. Still, those words stayed with me. How often had I done the same thing? How many times had I hidden my feelings because I believed silence was kinder? That afternoon, while arranging books on the newly finished shelves, I found myself thinking less about Chicago and more about courage. Not the courage to move. The courage to stay. Not staying in a place. Staying present. Staying honest. Staying open, even when there was no guarantee of the ending you hoped for. By 4 o'clock, the house was almost ready for its final walkthrough. Only one room remained unfinished. The music room. The grand piano still stood beside the window overlooking the lake. Its polished black surface reflected the afternoon light. I ran my fingertips gently along its edge. "You've never told me why you stopped playing." Ben had entered so quietly I hadn't heard him. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. "I told myself I was too busy. But that wasn't the real reason." "No." He looked at the piano for a long moment. "Emily used to sit beside me while I played." His smile was faint. She'd make up songs about absolutely nothing. "What happened after she left for college?" "I walked into this room one evening." He paused. I sat down. I put my hands on the keys. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time we'd played together. His eyes never left the piano. So I closed it. "You thought avoiding it would hurt less." "I did." "Did it?" He looked at me. "No." A gentle silence settled between us. I stepped closer to the piano and carefully lifted the floorboard. The keys gleamed softly. "Play one note," I said. He hesitated. "I don't think I can." "You don't have to play a song." I smiled. "Just prove to yourself that grief doesn't own this room anymore." He looked at the keyboard for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he sat down. One finger rested on a single ivory key. He pressed it. A clear, warm note floated through the room. It lingered in the air before slowly fading into silence. Ben closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with quiet relief rather than pain. "I thought it would break me," he whispered. "It didn't." I smiled. "No. It reminded you. He nodded. And that's different. Sometimes healing isn't the moment we stop remembering. It's the moment remembering no longer keeps us from living. As the last light of day stretched across the lake, I glanced at my phone. A calendar notification appeared. Chicago interview. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My stomach tightened. Tomorrow, someone would ask me where I saw my future. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure the answer lived on a resume. Tuesday morning arrived with a quiet rain. Seattle seemed to wear rain the way some people wore old sweaters, comfortably, without apology. I sat at the dining table in my apartment 15 minutes before my interview, staring at my laptop instead of opening it. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Funny how a simple sound could suddenly feel so loud when your heart was trying to make a decision your mind couldn't explain. I opened my notebook, hoping to distract myself. Instead, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the table. Ben's handwritten note. Thank you for helping me see my home again. I smiled without realizing it. Then I carefully folded it again and slipped it back inside the notebook. No, that wasn't why I was hesitating. At least, it wasn't the whole reason. The interview notification appeared on my screen. Your meeting begins in 5 minutes. I closed my eyes. What am I really afraid of? The answer came almost immediately. I wasn't afraid of Chicago. I was afraid of waking up 5 years from now with another successful career and another empty heart. That realization startled me. Not because it mentioned Ben, because it mentioned me. For years, I had been running so hard toward achievement that I had forgotten to ask myself what kind of life I was actually trying to build. Success is a wonderful servant. It's a terrible substitute for purpose. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Then I clicked Join Meeting. The interview lasted just under an hour. The questions were thoughtful. My experience, my design philosophy, the kinds of projects I hoped to lead. Then came the final question. Naomi, the hiring director said warmly, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Months ago, I would have answered without thinking. Leading a national design team, managing landmark restoration projects, living in a bigger city. Instead, I paused. I see myself creating places where people feel safe enough to be themselves. The interviewer smiled. That's a beautiful answer. It took me a long time to understand it. When the interview ended, I closed my laptop and sat quietly. I hadn't lied, but I also hadn't answered the question the way I once would have. Somewhere along the journey, my definition of success had begun to change, not because I had become less ambitious, because I had become more honest. That afternoon, I drove to the lake house. The renovation was nearly complete. Only a few finishing touches remained. As I stepped inside, I found Ben standing in the foyer, adjusting a framed photograph that had just been rehung on the wall. He stepped back, tilted it slightly, then nodded to himself. I think that's straight. I looked at it. It leans a little to the left. He sighed dramatically. I knew you were going to say that. I laughed. You hired a perfectionist. I've noticed. He handed me the frame. Would you do the honors? I adjusted it by the smallest amount. There. He studied it again. How do you even notice that? I've spent my career paying attention to little things. He looked at me for a moment, before quietly saying, I think that's one of the reasons people feel comfortable around you. His words caught me off guard. I don't know about that. I do. He walked toward the living room. You notice things without making people feel judged. I followed him. That's a rare gift. I smiled. My grandmother deserves the credit. The counselor? I nodded. She used to tell me that listening isn't waiting for your turn to speak. What is it? It's making another person feel like their story matters. Ben looked around the room that had changed so much since the renovation began. I wish I'd learned that sooner. You learned it. Late. I shook my head. Late isn't the same as never. He looked at me thoughtfully. I think you've said more things that changed my life than you realize. A gentle silence settled over us. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the lake in shimmering bands of gold. Ben walked toward the open front door. Come here. I joined him on the porch. The entire property seemed brighter than it had that morning. It looks different after the rain, I said. He smiled. Everything usually does. I looked at the garden, the roses, the lilies, the freshly restored porch. The home no longer looked like a place frozen by loss. It looked like a place ready for new memories. Naomi. His voice was quiet. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous habit. He laughed softly. I know. Then his smile faded into something more serious. When this renovation is finished. He hesitated. I'm going to keep buying flowers every Friday. I looked at him, but not because I'm afraid of forgetting. He glanced toward the vase inside the entryway. Because now they'll remind me that love isn't only something we remember. He met my eyes. It's something we continue. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze carried the scent of cedar and fresh earth across the porch. In that silence, I understood something my mother had tried to teach me years before. The strongest relationships are not built on dramatic promises. They're built on ordinary days that slowly become extraordinary because of the person standing beside you. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed. A new email. Chicago Design Group. My heart skipped. The decision I had been waiting for had finally arrived. I stared at the unopened message. Ben noticed. You don't have to read it now. I know. Whatever it says. What? He smiled gently. I'm hoping it leads you toward the life you'll be proud of. Not the life that keeps you comfortable. Not the life that impresses strangers. The life that lets you recognize yourself when you look in the mirror. I slipped my phone back into my pocket without opening the email. Some decisions deserve more than a quick glance. Some deserve a quiet heart. And somehow, I knew that before the week was over, I would finally have to choose between the future I had planned and the future that had quietly found me. I didn't open the email until the next morning, not because I wasn't curious, because I knew that once I read it, life would ask something of me. For a few quiet moments, I simply sat by my apartment window, watching the rain slide down the glass. It reminded me of something my mother used to say whenever I rushed into a decision. Never let urgency make choices that wisdom should make. Back then, I thought she was talking about careers. Now I understood she was talking about life. I took a slow breath and opened the message. Congratulations. The very first word made my heart sink. Not because it was bad news, because it was exactly the news I'd worked so hard to receive. The position was mine. A generous salary, a leadership role, creative freedom, everything I had imagined wanting. The company asked only one thing. They needed my answer within 5 days. 5 days. I read the email 3 more times. The words never changed. Yet somehow, I did. When I arrived at Ben's house that afternoon, he was kneeling in the front garden, carefully planting a row of lavender beneath the porch windows. You switched flowers, I said. He smiled without looking up. The lilies are inside. And these? My mother loved lavender too. He gently pressed the soil around the roots. She used to say every home should have something beautiful that greeted people before they reached the front door. I knelt beside him. You remember a lot of what she taught you. I didn't when I was younger. He looked toward the lake. I do now. Life has a strange sense of timing. The lessons we ignore in our 20s often become the ones we depend on in our 40s. We worked together in comfortable silence until the last plant was in the ground. As we stood, Ben noticed the expression on my face. You heard from Chicago. It wasn't a question. I nodded. They offered me the job. He smiled, a genuine smile. I'm proud of you. No hesitation, no disappointment, no attempt to hide what he felt. Just pride. Oddly enough, that made everything harder. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. You expected me to get it. I expected them to recognize what I've already seen. His words landed gently, but they carried enormous weight. Being seen is one of the deepest human needs. Not admired, not praised, seen, for who we truly are. I haven't answered them yet, I admitted. Ben leaned against the porch railing. May I tell you something? Of course. I hope you choose the life you'll still be grateful for 10 years from now. I waited. If that's Chicago. He smiled softly. I'll be happy for you. And if it isn't, then I'll be happy for you. I laughed quietly. You're making this impossible. No. He looked directly into my eyes. I'm trying very hard not to. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind carried the scent of cedar through the trees. Somewhere across the lake, children laughed from a nearby park. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet my own world felt suspended between two futures. That evening, after the crew had finished for the day, Mrs. Donnelly stopped by with a basket of warm blueberry muffins. I've brought peace offerings. Ben laughed. For what crime? For working too hard. She handed me one of the muffins before settling into a chair on the porch. I've been watching this house. Ben raised an eyebrow. That sounds slightly suspicious. I'm 82. She grinned. I've earned the right to be a little suspicious. We all laughed. Then she looked around the property. You know what I've noticed? What? I asked. The house smiles again. Ben chuckled. Houses don't smile. Oh, yes, they do. She pointed toward the open windows. They welcome light. Toward the garden, they welcome life. Then she looked at Ben. And sometimes... She paused. The people inside finally remember how to do the same. No one spoke, because she was right. This renovation had never been about replacing old wood or repainting faded walls. It had been about making room for hope again. Mrs. Donnelly slowly stood. As Ben walked her to her car, she gently squeezed his arm. I couldn't hear everything she said, only the last sentence. Don't let gratitude stay silent for too long. When Ben returned, he stared across the lake for several moments. What did she mean? I asked. He smiled faintly. I think... He looked down at his hands. She was reminding me that people shouldn't have to guess how much they matter. His answer settled deep within me. How many relationships fail, not because love disappears, but because appreciation remains unspoken? How many parents assume their children know they're proud of them? How many friends believe affection is understood without ever being expressed? How many hearts quietly ache because everyone is waiting for someone else to speak first? As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, I slipped my phone from my pocket once more. The email from Chicago was still waiting. 5 days. I looked toward Ben, who was watering the newly planted lavender. Then I looked back at the glowing screen. For the first time in my life, I realized the hardest decisions aren't the ones between success and failure. They're the ones between two good futures. And choosing one almost always means grieving the other. For the next 3 days, I carried the Chicago offer everywhere I went. Not in my hands. In my thoughts. It followed me while I drove to Ben's house each morning. It lingered while I reviewed paint samples with the contractors. It waited beside me during quiet lunches overlooking the lake. Everywhere I turned, the question remained the same. What kind of life do I want to build? Not the life other people admired. Not the life that looked impressive on paper. My life. It amazed me how difficult that question became once I stopped answering it for everyone else. By Friday morning, the renovation had entered its final stage. The furniture had been moved back into place. The artwork hung neatly on freshly painted walls. Sunlight poured through spotless windows, making the entire home feel brighter than it had the day I first walked through the front door. Back then, the house had felt like it was holding its breath. Now, it felt as though it had finally exhaled. Ben was in the kitchen arranging fresh white lilies in their familiar vase. He noticed me watching. I almost forgot today was Friday. I smiled. I don't think you did. He laughed. You're right. He stepped back and admired the arrangement. My mother always said flowers remind us that beautiful things don't last forever. And what did you think she meant? When I was younger? He shrugged. I thought she was talking about flowers. And now? He looked at me thoughtfully. I think she was reminding me not to postpone joy. The sentence settled gently between us. How many sunsets had Ben missed because he stayed at the office? How many conversations had I rushed through because I was already thinking about the next project? The truth was uncomfortable. Neither of us had been wasting our lives intentionally. We had simply mistaken productivity for purpose. Around lunchtime, the final inspector arrived to approve the renovation. He spent nearly an hour walking through every room, checking electrical work, plumbing, flooring, and structural changes. When he finally closed his clipboard, he smiled. Everything looks excellent. The contractors exchanged relieved glances. A few even applauded. The renovation was officially complete. As everyone celebrated, I quietly stepped onto the back porch. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. A gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar and lavender through the air. Footsteps approached behind me. I thought I'd find you out here. I turned. Ben held 2 glasses of iced tea. I figured we'd celebrate. I accepted one. To the house? He smiled. To the people who made it feel like home again. We clinked our glasses together. Neither of us drank immediately. Instead, we stood side by side, looking across the water. I've been thinking about something, Ben said. I've noticed you do that a lot. He laughed. I suppose I have. Then he grew quiet again. When you first arrived here, he looked toward the front door. I thought I was hiring someone to renovate a house. And instead, you reminded me that I was still capable of changing. His words caught me off guard. Ben? No, let me finish. He took a slow breath. For years, I blamed work. The long hours, the pressure, the responsibilities. He looked down at his glass. But the hardest truth was realizing my calendar wasn't the problem. What was? The choices I kept making every day. He met my eyes. I can't rewrite those years. I shook my head gently. No. But I can decide how I live the years I still have. A quiet smile spread across my face. That's all any of us can do. We fell silent again, not because we had nothing left to say, because some truths deserve room to settle. After several minutes, Ben spoke again. "I've written Emily a letter." I looked at him, surprised. "A letter?" He nodded. "I've apologized before, but I've never really told her everything. You don't have to be perfect." "I know," he smiled sadly. "I just want to be honest." There it was, the lesson this house had been teaching from the very beginning. Healing doesn't begin when we become flawless. It begins when we become truthful. "I'm proud of you," I said. His eyes softened. "Thank you." Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed. Another email from Chicago. "Reminder, please confirm your decision by Monday at 5 p.m. I stared at the screen. The deadline suddenly felt very real. Ben noticed. "Running out of time?" I nodded. "A little." He looked toward the lake before speaking. "I wish I could tell you what to do." "I know. But if I did?" He smiled gently. "You might spend the rest of your life wondering whether you chose your future or mine." His words were exactly what I needed to hear. Love doesn't make decisions for us. Real love gives us the courage to make them ourselves. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, we walked slowly back toward the house. The renovation trucks were gone. The tools had been packed away. Only the quiet beauty of the restored home remained. I paused at the front door and turned for one last look. The cedar trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. The fresh lavender framed the walkway. Warm light glowed through the windows. The house no longer looked like a place waiting for someone to return. It looked like a place ready for tomorrow. As I climbed into my car, one thought echoed in my heart. Sometimes life doesn't ask whether we're brave enough to chase our dreams. Sometimes it asks whether we're brave enough to admit our dreams have changed. And I had only one weekend left to discover my answer. Saturday arrived with the kind of morning that made the entire lake look as though it had been wrapped in silver. The renovation was finished. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't driving to Ben's house because there was work waiting for me. I was driving there because he had invited me to breakfast. No blueprints, no paint samples, no contractors, just breakfast. That simple difference made me smile the entire drive. Sometimes the most meaningful moments begin when we stop needing a reason to be together. When I pulled into the driveway, the front door was already open. Ben stood on the porch, holding 2 mugs. I was beginning to think the coffee would get cold. "You underestimate how seriously I take free breakfast." He laughed. "I've noticed." As I stepped inside, I stopped without realizing it. The house felt completely different, not because the walls had changed, because the atmosphere had. Sunlight streamed through the windows without competing with stacks of lumber or drop cloths. Fresh lavender scented the entryway. Soft piano music drifted through the living room. I looked toward Ben. "You played?" He nodded. "Only for a few minutes." "And?" I didn't stop because it hurt. A gentle smile crossed his face. "I stopped because breakfast was burning." I laughed so hard, I nearly spilled my coffee. "There he is." He looked puzzled. "Who?" "The man who laughs before he overthinks." He smiled. "I've missed him too." We carried our plates onto the back porch overlooking the lake. For several minutes, we simply ate in comfortable silence. The breeze moved gently across the water. A family of ducks glided past the dock. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes sang softly. "You know," Ben said, setting down his coffee, "I used to think peace was something you earned after everything in life was finally under control. And now? I think peace begins the moment you stop trying to control everything." I leaned back in my chair. That's a lesson a lot of people spend their whole lives chasing. Myself included. He looked across the lake. I kept believing one more achievement would finally make me feel secure. Did it? It made me busier. His answer carried no bitterness, only understanding. There was something deeply freeing about watching someone stop pretending they had all the answers. Real wisdom often begins with the sentence, "I was wrong," not because it humiliates us, because it opens the door to becoming someone better. After breakfast, we walked slowly through the garden. The lavender had begun to bloom. Bees drifted lazily from flower to flower. Ben paused beside one of the cedar trees. "My father planted this the year Emily was born." I rested my hand gently against the rough bark. "It's beautiful. He used to tell me something every time we watered it." "What was that?" "Trees don't become strong because the weather is easy." He smiled faintly. "They become strong because they stay rooted through every season." I looked up into the branches swaying overhead. "I think people are a lot like that." "I do too," he nodded thoughtfully. "I spent years trying to avoid difficult seasons. And now? I've learned they were shaping me the whole time. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt peaceful rather than empty. It occurred to me that this was one of the greatest gifts another person can give you, the ability to be quiet without feeling alone. As we returned toward the porch, Ben reached into his pocket. I almost forgot. He handed me a folded envelope. I found this while cleaning my office. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten list. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Things I don't want to forget again." Below it were only 5 sentences. Call Emily every Sunday. Leave work before dinner at least 3 nights a week. Play the piano, even if only for 1 song. Buy flowers because love deserves to be celebrated, not mourned. Tell people what they mean to me while they can still hear it. I read the list twice before looking up. You wrote this? He nodded. I needed something to remind me that change isn't a feeling. What is it? A habit. I smiled. My grandmother would have liked that. What would she have said? The life you want isn't built in one dramatic moment. I folded the paper carefully. It's built by the promises you keep on ordinary days. Ben smiled. I think she would have gotten along with my mother. I think they would have become best friends. We both laughed. Then the laughter faded into another quiet moment. I slipped the list back into the envelope and handed it to him. No. He gently pushed it back toward me. I want you to keep it. Why? So if you ever wonder whether people can really change. He smiled warmly. You'll remember one man who decided to try. Emotion caught unexpectedly in my throat. There are gifts money can buy. Then there are gifts that become part of your life. That simple list belonged to the second kind. Just then, my phone vibrated. Another reminder. Chicago offer expires Monday, 5 p.m. Only 48 hours remained. I looked from the screen to the peaceful lake stretching before me. Then to Ben. He wasn't watching my phone. He was watching a pair of bluebirds building a nest beneath the porch roof. Without turning toward me, he said quietly, You don't have to decide today. I looked at him in surprise. I wasn't going to ask. I know, he smiled. I just wanted you to know that sometimes waiting one more day isn't procrastination. He finally met my eyes. Sometimes it's giving your heart enough time to catch up with your head. His words settled deeply inside me. Maybe that was the lesson I'd been resisting all along. Not every important decision should be made quickly. Some deserve patience. Some deserve honesty. And some need enough silence for the truth to finally find us. The rest of Saturday passed more quietly than I expected. There were no dramatic conversations, no unexpected confessions, just ordinary moments that somehow felt more significant than anything either of us could have planned. Ben spent the afternoon replacing a few weathered boards on the dock. I sat nearby with my sketchbook, adding the final details to a watercolor of the front porch that I planned to give him before I left. Every so often, one of us would say something. Most of the time, we simply enjoyed the sound of the lake. It struck me that happiness doesn't always arrive with excitement. Sometimes it arrives disguised as peace. Late that afternoon, Ben climbed onto the dock beside me and stretched his legs toward the water. I haven't done absolutely nothing in years, he admitted. You've been busy doing nothing? He laughed. I mean, sitting still. And how does it feel? He thought about it. Uncomfortable. I smiled knowingly. But, he glanced across the lake. Also, necessary. There it was again. Another quiet lesson. Many of us become so accustomed to constant movement that stillness feels unfamiliar. Yet, it's often in the quiet that we finally hear the questions we've been outrunning. After a while, Ben turned toward me. Can I ask you something? You've earned the right. When you first came here. He paused. What did you think of me? I couldn't help smiling. You really want the honest answer? I do. I thought you were hiding another woman. He stared at me for a second before laughing so hard he nearly lost his balance on the dock. I was. That's suspicious? You told me you lived alone. I did. Then I found warm coffee, fresh flowers, children's keepsakes, and a house that felt occupied. He shook his head, still laughing. I suppose I walked right into that. You definitely did. The laughter slowly faded. Then his expression softened. I'm glad you stayed long enough to discover the truth. So am I. The truth wasn't another person. He looked toward the house. It was a man who didn't know how to stop living in yesterday. His words settled gently between us. There is a difference between remembering the past and refusing to leave it. Healing begins when we learn to carry our memories without asking them to carry our future. That evening, I drove across town to have dinner with my brother Marcus. He opened the door before I even reached the porch. You've got that look. What look? The one you get when your heart already knows the answer. I wish it were that simple. He smiled. It usually is. We ordered takeout and ate on his small apartment balcony while the sun disappeared behind the Seattle skyline. Halfway through dinner, he asked the question I'd been expecting. So? I looked up. Chicago? I sighed. Still waiting. No. He shook his head. I mean, what are you waiting for? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched the city lights begin to flicker on. I've spent so much of my life chasing the next opportunity. And I'm beginning to wonder whether I've confused opportunity with purpose. Marcus nodded slowly. That's an important difference. I know. He leaned back in his chair. Can I tell you something Mom used to say after Dad died? I smiled. I probably need to hear it. She used to tell me, don't build a life that's impressive from the outside if it leaves you lonely on the inside. Emotion caught in my throat. I haven't thought about that in years. I don't think she meant we should stop dreaming. He looked at me kindly. I think she meant our dreams should make room for people. Those words stayed with me the entire drive home, not because they answered my question, because they helped me ask a better one. Instead of asking, which job is better, I found myself asking, which life feels more like the woman I'm becoming? Sunday morning arrived with bright blue skies, the first truly clear day in weeks. I decided to take a walk before calling Ben. Halfway around the lake, I found myself stopping near an old wooden bench overlooking the water. An elderly man sat there alone, feeding crumbs to a pair of sparrows. As I turned to leave, he smiled. Beautiful morning. It really is. He looked toward the lake. My wife loved mornings like this. Loved? He nodded. I lost her 3 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. He smiled gently. But I'm grateful too. I looked at him curiously. Grateful? I had 46 years with someone who made ordinary days feel extraordinary. He brushed a few crumbs from his hands. Grief hurts because love mattered. His words reminded me so much of Ben that I felt my chest tighten. The man stood slowly and picked up his walking stick. As he prepared to leave, he offered one final thought. Don't wait too long to tell people what they mean to you. He smiled warmly. Life has a way of reminding us that tomorrow is a gift, not a guarantee. I watched him walk slowly down the path until he disappeared behind the trees. The lake became quiet again. Only the breeze disturbed the water. I reached into my pocket and looked once more at the email from Chicago. The deadline was less than 24 hours away. Then I opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over Ben's name. I smiled to myself, not because I had finally made a decision, but because, for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of listening to my own heart. I pressed call. Ben answered on the second ring. Good morning? His voice carried the same calm warmth it always had, yet hearing it through the phone felt strangely different. Hi. A brief silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just careful. I hope I'm not interrupting anything, I said. You interrupted me while I was trying to convince the coffee maker to cooperate. I laughed. So, the mighty CEO has been defeated by a kitchen appliance? It appears so. Need professional help? I was actually hoping you might say that. I can be there in 20 minutes. I'll make another pot. You'll probably burn it. I probably will. We both laughed. When the call ended, I realized something that made me smile the entire drive to the lake. Neither of us had invented an excuse to talk. Neither of us had hidden behind work or the renovation. For the first time, we simply wanted to spend time together. Sometimes the strongest relationships begin the moment two people stop pretending every conversation has to have a purpose. Ben was standing on the porch when I arrived. I managed not to burn it. I'm impressed. I almost called the fire department as a precaution. I shook my head, laughing. You're impossible. So I've been told. Inside, the house felt peaceful. Not because everything was finally perfect, because it finally felt lived in. The fresh lilies stood in their usual place. The piano lid was open. Morning sunlight stretched across the restored hardwood floors. The house no longer felt like it was waiting for the past. It felt ready for the future. Ben handed me a mug. Walk with me? We wandered slowly toward the dock. Neither of us hurried to begin the conversation that had quietly followed us all weekend. Finally, Ben stopped beside the water. You've been thinking. I have. So have I. The lake reflected the pale blue morning sky with remarkable stillness. I almost called you yesterday, he admitted. What stopped you? He smiled faintly. I promised myself I wouldn't make your decision harder. I looked at him for a long moment. You never made it harder. No? You made me ask better questions. His expression softened. What kind of questions? Not, which job pays more? I smiled. Questions like, who am I becoming? He lowered his eyes for a moment before speaking. I've been asking myself something similar. What? Who do I want to be for the people I love? The question settled between us like the gentle morning breeze. For years, both of us had been chasing accomplishments. Now we were chasing character, and those are very different journeys. I visited Emily yesterday. Ben said quietly. You did? He nodded. We had lunch. How did it go? He smiled in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a napkin. On it, written in blue ink, were just 4 words. I'm proud of you, Dad. Emily wrote that? I asked. She slipped it under my coffee cup before she left. His eyes glistened. I've spent years believing I had permanently damaged our relationship. He carefully folded the napkin again. Yesterday she reminded me that love can survive even when time has been wasted. I felt my own eyes sting. That's beautiful. It is. He looked across the lake. I can't get those lost years back. No, but I can make sure I don't lose the years ahead. There was something profoundly hopeful in that sentence. Growth doesn't erase regret. It teaches us how to keep regret from deciding the rest of our lives. We stood quietly for a while, watching gentle ripples move across the water. Then Ben turned toward me. Can I ask you something? Always. When you leave. He stopped himself. Then he smiled apologetically. Listen to me. You noticed. I assumed you were leaving. His voice became thoughtful. I never actually asked what you decided. I looked down at the coffee, warming my hands. I haven't replied yet. He nodded. I figured. You did? You stopped talking about Chicago. I started talking about life instead. He smiled. I noticed. Again, he had noticed. Maybe that was one of the greatest lessons this entire journey had taught me. Love isn't measured by how loudly someone speaks. It's measured by how carefully they listen. I reached into my bag and removed my phone. The unopened email still waited there. Ben said gently. Today's the deadline. It is. I want you to know something before you decide. He took a slow breath. If accepting that job is what your heart truly wants. He met my eyes. I'll celebrate with you. And if I stay? His smile grew warmer. I'll celebrate with you then too. I laughed through tears. You're making it impossible not to cry. I wasn't trying to. I know. For a moment, the only sound between us was the breeze moving through the cedar trees. Then I looked at the screen one last time. My thumb hovered over the email. I opened it, read the offer again, closed my eyes. And finally, I began to type my reply, not because I was choosing between Ben and Chicago, but because, after weeks of listening to my fears, my ambitions, my memories, and my hopes, I had finally learned to listen to myself. When I finished, I pressed send. Ben didn't ask what I had written. He simply smiled. Because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't needing to know someone's decision. It's trusting that they'll make it for the right reasons. And for the first time, in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. After I pressed send, I didn't feel the rush of excitement I had expected. I felt still, not empty, not uncertain, simply still. For years, every major decision in my life had been followed by 100 second guesses. Should I have negotiated more? Should I have waited? Should I have chosen differently? This time, there was none of that. Peace doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives so quietly that you almost miss it. Ben looked at me with the same patient expression he had worn throughout the entire renovation. You don't have to tell me. I smiled. I know. He nodded. And that's exactly why you can. I laughed softly. I turned Chicago down. His eyes widened ever so slightly. Not with triumph, not with relief, with respect. You made your decision. I did. Were you certain? I looked across the lake. No. He raised an eyebrow. No? I was certain about the woman I wanted to become. I smiled. The decision followed that. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he quietly said, I've learned something about certainty. What? It's overrated. I laughed. I wasn't expecting that. I used to think confident people never questioned themselves. He leaned against the dock railing. Now I think wise people question themselves often. They just don't let fear answer for them. His words stayed with me. There is a difference between uncertainty and fear. Uncertainty asks us to think carefully. Fear tells us never to move at all. The healthiest lives are built by listening to the first without surrendering to the second. We began walking slowly back toward the house. Everything looked familiar now. The cedar trees, the restored porch, the lavender gently swaying beside the walkway. It struck me how much had changed without the landscape changing at all. Maybe that's what healing feels like. The world remains the same. We become different. Inside, the morning sunlight filled the living room. Ben paused beside the piano. "I owe you something." "You don't owe me anything." He lifted the piano lid and sat quietly on the bench. "I've avoided this instrument for years." He placed his fingers on the keys. "I think it's time." The first notes came slowly. Not perfect, not polished, honest. The melody wandered gently through the house, filling rooms that had once known only silence. I sat in the armchair near the window and simply listened. There were a few missed notes. One forgotten chord. Ben stopped halfway through. "I've lost my touch." I smiled. "No." He looked over at me. "You've found your courage." He laughed quietly before finishing the piece. When the final note faded, neither of us spoke. Some moments become smaller when they're explained. This wasn't one of them. A little while later, the doorbell rang. Ben opened the door to find Emily standing on the porch with an overnight bag slung over one shoulder. "Dad," he blinked in surprise. "I thought you were coming next weekend." Emily grinned. "I changed my mind." She stepped inside before noticing me. "You must be Naomi." I smiled. "And you must be Emily." She laughed. "So he's been talking about me?" "Only good things." Emily looked at her father. "I hope that's true." Ben chuckled. "I've been trying to make up for lost time." She wrapped her arms around him. "I'm giving you the chance." Watching them together felt like witnessing spring after a long winter. Not because every wound had disappeared, because both of them had decided the relationship was worth tending. Forgiveness isn't pretending pain never happened. It's choosing not to let pain have the final word. Emily turned toward me. "I've wanted to thank you." "For what?" She looked around the house. "I've never seen Dad smile this much." I shook my head. "That wasn't me." "It wasn't?" "No." I looked at Ben. He finally gave himself permission. Emily followed my gaze and smiled. "I think you're right." That afternoon, the three of us shared lunch on the back porch. Emily told stories from college. Ben listened without checking his phone once. Not a single time. I noticed it. Emily noticed it too. When she finished telling one particularly funny story, she caught her father smiling. "What?" He shrugged. "I'm just trying to remember everything." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to remember every word." She smiled warmly. "Just keep showing up." Ben looked at her with tears threatening the corners of his eyes. "I will." "I know. There are promises spoken with words. Then there are promises proven by consistent presence. The second kind lasts longer." As evening approached, I prepared to head home. Ben walked me to my car. Neither of us seemed eager for the conversation to end. "I've been thinking," he said. "I've noticed." He laughed. "I know." Then he became serious. "When all of this started," he glanced toward the house, "I believed the renovation would give me a better place to live." "And what did it actually give you?" He smiled. "A better way to live." Emotion caught gently in my throat. I think it gave me the same thing. For a moment, we simply stood there. The breeze carried the scent of lavender through the warm evening air. The lake reflected the golden light of the setting sun. Ben looked at me with quiet honesty. "I don't want to rush whatever this is." "I don't either. I've rushed enough important things in my life." "So have I." He smiled. "What if we do something completely unusual?" "What's that?" "We take our time." I laughed softly. "That sounds wonderfully ordinary." "I think ordinary has become my favorite kind of extraordinary." I nodded. "So has mine." As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Ben stood on the porch waving. Emily appeared beside him a moment later. The house no longer looked like a monument to memories. It looked like a place where new ones were already beginning. And for the first time since I had walked through its front door, I understood that the greatest love stories are not built on dramatic declarations. They are built one ordinary day at a time, by two people who keep choosing each other with honesty, patience, and grace. A year has a quiet way of changing people, not all at once, not through dramatic speeches or unforgettable moments, but through ordinary mornings, through habits repeated with love, through promises quietly kept. Exactly 1 year after the renovation ended, I turned into the familiar gravel driveway just as the first rays of sunlight stretched across Lake Washington. The cedar trees still swayed gently in the breeze. The lavender lining the front walkway had grown twice as full as when Ben first planted it. Fresh, white lilies rested beside the front door. Some traditions no longer reminded him of loss. Now they reminded him that love was still alive. Before I could knock, the front door opened. "I had a feeling you'd arrive early," Ben said with a smile. "You've started predicting my habits." "I've had a year to practice." I laughed. "And have you gotten any better?" "A little." He stepped aside. "Come in." The moment I crossed the threshold, I paused. Not because the house had changed again. Because it hadn't. That was what made it beautiful. The renovations were complete. The walls still carried the warm cream color we'd chosen together. The restored hardwood floors glowed beneath the morning sunlight. The piano stood proudly in the music room with its lid open instead of closed. Nothing felt staged anymore. Everything felt lived in. A home finally becomes itself when people stop trying to protect it from life. Ben noticed me looking around. "What?" "It feels different." "I was hoping you'd say that." "I can't explain why." "You don't have to." He smiled. "I know why." He walked toward the living room. "Come here." Resting on the mantel above the fireplace were several framed photographs. Some I recognized. The picture of Emily learning to ride her bicycle. The family photo by the lake. A photograph of Ben's parents smiling beneath the old cedar tree. But there were newer ones too. Emily laughing as she helped plant flowers in the garden. Mrs. Donnelly holding a pie in one hand and pointing playfully at Ben with the other. The renovation crew gathered on the porch after finishing the project. Even one of me, standing in the kitchen, completely unaware that someone had taken the picture while I was laughing. I looked at Ben. "You framed these?" "I did." "You said you didn't like displaying too many photographs." "I used to think pictures trapped me in the past." He gently adjusted one of the frames. "Now, I think they remind me to stay grateful." I smiled. "That's a healthier reason." "I've had a good teacher." I shook my head. "No, you've had the courage to learn." He looked at the photographs for another moment before quietly saying, "You know something I realized this year?" "What?" "I stopped apologizing every day." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I used to wake up thinking about everything I'd done wrong." He folded his hands in front of him. "The marriage, the missed birthdays, the years I can't get back." He took a slow breath. "I'll always regret those things." He looked around the room. "But I don't live inside them anymore." His words touched something deep inside me. Regret has a purpose. It teaches us. It was never meant to become our permanent address. Just then, the front door burst open. "Dad!" Emily stepped inside carrying 2 grocery bags. Behind her walked Mrs. Donnelly with another homemade pie balanced carefully in her hands. "I brought backup," Emily announced. Mrs. Donnelly laughed. "I heard there might be too much food." "There is no such thing," Ben replied. Emily spotted me and wrapped me in a warm hug. "It's so good to see you." "You too." She looked around the room. "I swear this house gets brighter every time I come home." Mrs. Donnelly smiled knowingly. "Houses have a funny way of reflecting the people living inside them." Ben laughed. "You're still talking to houses?" "They've always been better listeners than some people." Everyone laughed. The room filled with easy conversation as groceries found their way onto the kitchen counters. Watching them together, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Family isn't built by never hurting each other. Every family does. Every friendship does. Every marriage does. Family is built by choosing to repair what has been damaged instead of pretending it doesn't matter. As we prepared lunch together, Emily nudged me gently. "Can I borrow you for a minute?" We stepped out onto the back porch overlooking the lake. She leaned against the railing exactly where Ben often stood. "I wanted to thank you." "You already have." "Not properly." She looked toward the dock. "I haven't seen my dad like this since I was a little girl." Emotion tightened my throat. "He did the hard work." "I know," she smiled. "But sometimes people need someone to remind them they're worth saving." I looked back toward the house. Ben was inside laughing with Mrs. Donnelly over whether he had added too much salt to the soup. The sound drifted through the open windows. Warm, relaxed, real. "I didn't save him," I said softly. Emily looked at me curiously. "No?" I shook my head. "I just believed the man he was becoming deserved a chance." She smiled. "I think that's what love looks like. Not rescuing someone. Not changing them. Believing in the person they're willing to become." The breeze carried the scent of cedar and lavender across the porch. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the sunlight dance across the lake. Finally, Emily smiled. "You know?" "What?" "When Dad first bought this place, He used to say he wanted the biggest house on the lake. I laughed. That sounds like him. He got older. She glanced back toward the kitchen. Now he says he just wants a house that's always full of people he loves. I smiled. I think that's a much better dream. So do I. As we walked back inside, I realized that dreams don't disappear as we grow older. The best ones simply become less about proving ourselves, and more about sharing our lives with the people who make them meaningful. And standing in that warm kitchen, surrounded by laughter instead of silence, I knew this house had finally revealed its greatest secret. It had never been asking Ben to let go of the past. It had been patiently waiting for him to invite the future inside. After lunch, the house slowly grew quiet again. Mrs. Donnelly gathered her empty pie dish, insisting there was no point washing it because she'd only bring another pie next week anyway. Emily hugged her father tightly before loading her overnight bag into her car. I'll call you Sunday. Ben smiled. You don't have to remind me. I know, she grinned. I just like hearing you say it. I'll be waiting. As she drove away, Ben stood on the porch until her car disappeared around the bend. He didn't look sad. He looked grateful. A year earlier, goodbye had reminded him of everything he'd lost. Now it reminded him of everything he still had. There is an enormous difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness believes no one is coming back. Love trusts that meaningful relationships continue, even when the driveway is empty. I joined Ben on the porch. The afternoon sun rested gently over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold. Neither of us hurried to speak. Some silences are earned. This was one of them. Finally, Ben smiled. Do you remember the first thing you said when you walked into this house? I laughed softly. I asked who made the coffee. You did. I was convinced someone else lived here. You weren't entirely wrong. I looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He rested his hands on the porch railing. The man who lived here then. He paused. Isn't the man standing here now? Emotion tightened quietly in my chest. You've changed. I have. He looked toward the garden where the lavender swayed gently in the breeze. But so have you. I leaned against the railing beside him. You're right. When we first met, you were always looking toward the next project. He smiled warmly. Now you notice sunsets. I laughed. I've always noticed sunsets. You've always seen them. He turned toward me. Now you stay long enough to enjoy them. His words settled gently into my heart. How often do we rush through beautiful moments because we're already planning the next one? Life is rarely transformed by extraordinary occasions. It's transformed by learning to be fully present in ordinary ones. Ben reached into his pocket. I have something for you. He handed me a small brass key attached to a simple leather tag. I looked at it in confusion. What is this? The front door. I blinked. You don't have to. I know, he smiled. I'm not giving it to you because I expect you to use it every day. He looked at the house. I'm giving it to you because I never want you to wonder whether you're welcome here. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It wasn't the key that moved me. It was what it represented. Trust, belonging, home. I closed my fingers gently around it. Thank you. He shook his head. No. His voice grew quieter. Thank you. For what? For walking into a house that looked complete. He smiled softly, and somehow, seeing all the places that still needed healing. Tears filled my eyes before I realized they were there. I only helped you notice them. You helped me face them. We stood quietly for another few moments. The breeze carried the scent of cedar, lavender, and fresh lilies across the porch. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed near the lake. Life continued exactly as it should. Ben finally broke the silence. I've been thinking. I laughed through my tears. You've definitely developed a habit. I have. He smiled. But this time, I know exactly what I want to say. He didn't kneel. He didn't reach for a ring. He didn't make a speech filled with impossible promises. Instead, he looked at me with the same quiet honesty that had slowly replaced the guarded man I met a year earlier. I can't promise we'll never disagree. I smiled. I'd worry if you did. I can't promise life won't surprise us. It will. I can't promise I'll never make another mistake. You won't. He took one careful step closer. But I can promise this. He gently took my hand. I will never stop choosing honesty over silence. His voice remained steady. I will never stop making room for the people I love. And I will never again assume there's always more time to say what matters. A tear escaped down my cheek. Not because his words were perfect, because they were true. I squeezed his hand. Then let me make you a promise too. He waited. I won't spend my life running toward the next achievement while ignoring the life happening beside me. I smiled through happy tears. I'll keep choosing conversations over assumptions, presence over perfection, and love over fear. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. Some promises become stronger without extra words. As the sun began to disappear behind the cedar trees, we walked slowly down to the dock. The water reflected the colors of the evening sky. Orange, gold, soft shades of blue, exactly as it had the first day I arrived. The lake hadn't changed. The house hadn't truly changed. The biggest transformation had happened inside the people standing beside it. I looked back toward the home one final time. The windows glowed warmly against the fading light. Fresh flowers rested near the entrance. Laughter still echoed faintly from inside. The house no longer felt like it was protecting old memories. It felt like it was making room for new ones. Ben slipped his hand into mine. "What are you thinking?" I smiled. "I've been thinking about the first day we met. The coffee, and the flowers, and the footprints." He laughed. "You really thought I was hiding someone?" "I did." "Were you disappointed?" I looked at him and smiled. "No. I found something much more important." "What?" "A man willing to become honest with himself." He looked back at the house. "You know, I finally understand something." "What?" "The house was never trying to convince you someone else lived here." He smiled gently. "It was trying to remind me that love leaves evidence." I leaned my head lightly against his shoulder. "And if we take care of it, it keeps leaving evidence." The first stars began to appear above the lake. For several peaceful minutes, neither of us spoke. We simply stood together, listening to the gentle rhythm of the water. Some love stories end with a wedding. Some end with a dramatic kiss. Ours ended with something quieter. Two imperfect people, standing beside a house that had witnessed grief, regret, forgiveness, and hope. Choosing, one ordinary evening at a time, to build a life where no important words were left unsaid. Because in the end, the CEO had been telling the truth. There was no one else. The house had simply been holding on to every piece of love he thought he had lost, until he was finally brave enough to live with it, instead of hiding from it. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson love can teach us. A home is not made by walls, windows, or beautiful furniture. A home is built every single day by people who choose to listen, forgive, grow, and keep showing up for one another. That is the kind of love worth protecting. And that is the kind of story worth remembering. As we come to the end of this journey, I'd love to hear from you. What was the biggest lesson you took away from Ben and Naomi's story? Was it about forgiveness, healing, second chances, or learning that love is something we choose every single day? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring love story filled with meaningful life lessons. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to heal, forgive, and love again, share this story with them. Until next time, remember this: the strongest homes aren't built with bricks alone. They're built with honesty, grace, forgiveness, and people who keep choosing each other, even on ordinary days. Thank you for spending your time with me, and I'll see you in the next love story.